OJ Simpson, why are we still talking about this guy? In fact, he's dead and gone at this point. The reason why it's so interesting still to this day is because it appears that somebody so obviously guilty got away with murder. And maybe he did. But the defense team did some remarkable things in his case. One of those things is they made race a central issue in the case. Even to this day, race has certain interest from folks, and it moves people in an emotional way. So even today, when we hear about OJ Simpsons, there are elements of race, there are elements of the dramatization of famous people committing crimes, but the very recent documentary that has just kind of come out, or at least is on Netflix right now, sort of re-examines the OJ Simpson case kind of through the eyes of the attorneys. One of the prosecutors is interviewed. One of the defense attorneys is interviewed, even a juror is interviewed, and it's fascinating, even 30 years, 35 years removed, how compelling that story really is. So I think it's really interesting to kind of get into some of the really high points of this case. One of those, of course, is when OJ Simpson tries on the glove and it doesn't fit.
Your Honor, at this time, the people would ask that Mr. Simpson step forward and try on the glove recovered at Bundy as well as the glove recovered at Rockingham.
Okay, I'm going to pause it here, and I will say this, that there is nothing that happens in trial that hasn't been thought about and rehearsed and gone over a number of times. So here you can see Marcia Clark is looking up at DA Darden, and it looks like she's got this look of panic, and it's because they talked about whether or not they were going to have OJ Simpson try on a glove. Now, there's an old adage in trial work that you should never ask a question that you don't know the answer, and you should never have a demonstrative exhibit, which is what these gloves are, that you don't know how it's going to play out. So you don't want something to happen to you during trial that you didn't fully expect. So that's the setup. And they don't know, they being the prosecutors, don't know whether or not this glove thing is actually going to work. Now, the backstory on this is Darden thinks that their case is tanking, so they've got to do something to recover. His idea is have OJ put on the glove that was supposedly worn by him during the killing.
All right, do you want to do that? All right, you can do that seated there. All right.
Now here we've got some of the Mount Rushmore of criminal defense. You got Johnny Cochran, and then you got F. Lee Bailey sitting to the right of O.J. Simpson, sometimes referred to as the Dream Team. One other thing that I will say that is very interesting about this is that the judge in a conference outside of the presence of the jury was going to allow Mr. Simpson to put on the glove, provided he used a rubber latex glove underneath so that there wasn't any biohazards, because the glove was full of blood. So you can imagine you've got a glove that is dried out with blood, likely shrank, and now you're trying to put it over latex gloves. So even going into this thing, it doesn't look good for the prosecution, but they forge ahead.
And I think so the jury can see, I'll ask Mr. Simpson to stand. All right. Mr. Darden, which glove do you have?
Right there is F. Lee Bailey, later was disbarred for an interesting reason.
The Bundy glove, Your Honor.
All right.
And after Mr. Simpson tries on the gloves, I would ask that he be required to step back over to the jury and again show him his bare hands.
Well, we'll get to that in a second. All right, the record should reflect that, as is our practice with these gloves, Mr. Simpson will have a pair of latex gloves on while doing this.
Now, there's a current Netflix show about this whole glove trying on, and among other things that happened inside the courtroom. Supposedly, according to O.J. Simpson's friends, he had really bad arthritis that would make his hands swell up. So because they knew this was coming, right, because nothing is off the cuff in these cases, everything is planned, they knew this was coming, so they recommended he not take his arthritis medicine so his hands would swell a little bit. Again, a lot of what you see in trial is all theater.
Handing Mr. Simpson the glove from Rockingham.
All right, so you're going to see that OJ Simpson is a skilled actor, was in a number of movies after his football career was done, and he does a really good job here of acting like he's putting this glove on and it doesn't fit. And we all can remember that Johnny Cochran then turns that into, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. So kind of a watershed moment in this trial.
Fine.
Mr. Simpson seems to be having a problem placing the glove on his hand. Could he be?
Sustained.
And again, just for the audience, the gloves are important to this case because one of the detectives, a guy named Mark Furman, finds one glove at the crime scene and another glove behind a bungalow at OJ Simpson's house that was in fairly close proximity. So this glove, if that's true, one glove's at the crime scene, the other matching glove is at OJ Simpson's residence. If they can link those things to OJ Simpson, it's very incriminating. So this glove is sort of the keystone to the prosecution's case. Now, what you're not going to see in this clip is that glove, I think, is called it's an isotoner brand glove. There's some video footage of OJ Simpson with that glove on a sideline doing a sideline interview. If I remember right, I'm not sure the prosecution ever played that, but there was some interesting evidence that was never entered into the courtroom. So let's just look at Marcia Clark right there. So she's on the right side of the screen there, and she knows this is not going the way she wanted to go. So clearly the glove doesn't look like it fits. There's not a lot they can do at this point. I think Darden might make some record about the fact that O.J. Simpson's not really trying to put it on, but damage has been done at this point, and Marcia Clark knows it.
Mr. Simpson. The other glove.
This is People's 164A. Is that the right-hand glove?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Now, Johnny Cochran and the boys have to be back here just grinning ear to ear because this couldn't be going any better for them.
All right, Deputy Jex, would you just take a step back, please? Thank you. All right, records reflect that Mr. Simpson has both gloves. Yes.
So anytime you hear a judge say, let the record reflect, well, this is got media coverage and there's cameras. There's also a court reporter that's transcribing every single moment. And so for purposes of appeal, you have to be able to capture what's happening in a courtroom. So you could hear the judge sort of pausing because he didn't want to say, let the record reflect O.J. Simpson's wearing the gloves. Or he goes, he's got the gloves, right? Because he can't make the record that they fit, that they're on. He's just saying that he's got them.
Mr. Simpson's indicating that his fingers are all the way into the glove and wrong.
All right. Thank you, counsel.
So let's see Marcia Clark's face. Not good. And she's glaring at Darden, her partner here, thinking this did not go the way we wanted it to. Now, if you watched the newest Netflix show on this, Darden explains his reasoning for that. And his reasoning, again, was that they didn't think their case was going very well, so he was going to throw a Hail Mary. I think if he could do it again, he would have never done that. Because, again, the gloves were wet, they dried, they were full of blood. Now the judge is saying, yeah, you can try them on, but you got to wear these latex gloves. Plus, you have a professional actor who's doing everything he can to make sure that doesn't happen the way Darden wants it to happen. And it just stands to reason. Now, do you think the killer would grab the glove and just slides right on? I mean, he's going to do everything he can to make sure that doesn't go the way Darden wanted it to go.
Could we ask him to replace the left glove onto his hand?
All right.
Now, what they're doing here, of course, is this is in front of the jury.
Extend them into the glove if one normally might put a glove on.
Yeah, I object
Yes.
to this statements by counsel.
So you heard Johnny Cochran say, I object to these statements by counsel. If you're kind of a legal wonk, it's really interesting to hear about when and where objections get made. So what Darden said, the prosecutor, is he editorializes what OJ's doing. Your Honor, can you instruct him to put the left glove on? And I think he said like the way you normally would or somebody normally would. So he's sort of editorializing what's going on. It's kind of a skill that you can pick up where you're sort of telling the jury what you're seeing. Again, statements from attorneys are not evidence, but you can sort of influence the jury. Johnny Cochran didn't like that at all, so he makes an objection. Again, that objection is something the judge has to rule, either overturned or sustained.
All right. He appears to have pulled the gloves on, counsel. All right. Would you show that to the jury, Mr. Simpson, in that manner? Thank you. Other hand, please.
Can we ask him to make a fist with his left hand while the glove is on? Can we ask him to make a fist with his right hand while the glove is on?
He is doing both.
Can we ask him to grasp an object in his hand? A marker, perhaps.
All right. Mr. Simpson.
Can we ask him to grasp the marker in his hand like this?
I object to this, Your Honor.
Yes,
I object.
I agree.
Counsel,
Can
go
we
ahead.
ask him to completely grasp the marker in his hand,
Yes.
whether it's raised or not?
Yes. All right. Thank you, counsel.
Thank you.
All right, so he's asked him to grab it to demonstrate that he could grab something like a knife, and then you heard Johnny Cochran again object to that. But the judge strangely did not make a ruling on that objection.
No longer an issue of cross-contamination, Your Honor. I have nothing further.
See, then kind of a snide remark there from Darden. He says an issue of cross-contamination because their criminologist up at that point has just been getting excoriated. But very interesting how this plays out in court. Now look, and this happens all the time during trial. You got your trial partners with you and you're discussing how you think the case is going. You try not to give away too much to a jury, but I'm assuming if I was right next to F. Lee Bailey as he's leaning into Johnny Cochran, he probably said something like, that couldn't have gone any better for us. Let's see what Johnny Cochran's face looks like.
I'm sorry, can we approach one moment before we...
Yeah, he couldn't be happier.
I want you to remember these words. Like the defining moment in this trial, the day Mr. Darden asked Mr. Simpson to try on those gloves and the gloves didn't fit. Remember these words. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Right, so that was kind of the most famous line that came out of that trial. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. So Darden took his gamble to try on the glove, didn't know what the result was going to be, and it blows up in his face. And this very skilled defense attorney, Johnny Cochran, hijacks that into the entire case. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
I was thinking last night about this case and their theory and how it didn't make any sense and how it didn't fit and how something is wrong. It occurred to me how they were going to come here and stand up here and tell you.
We were talking earlier about when attorneys actually get to argue the case. And it is right here. It's just the closing argument. So in your opening statement, you can't argue. In fact, there will be objections. When you're asking witnesses questions, you can't argue. It's these closing remarks. An attorney can tell the jury what he thinks of the evidence. And you can make arguments about that evidence. But up until that point, you can't do that. Interestingly, also, those closing arguments are not evidence. And the judge would even instruct, and probably did in this case and certainly does here in Colorado, that what the attorneys say in closing is not evidence. Whether a jury really understands that is another question, but it's important to know whatever Johnny Cochran's saying right now, it's not evidence. It's his argument, but it's not evidence. One thing fascinating about this case is I think there was 7 months of trial testimony. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, and that was it. Wild. They expected it to go on for days and days of deliberation.
OJ Simpson was going to disguise himself. Was going to put on a knit cap and some dark clothes, and he was going to get in his white Bronco and this recognizable person and go over and kill his wife. That's what they want you to believe. That's how silly their argument is. And I said to myself, maybe I can demonstrate this graphically. Let me show you something. This is a knit cap. I'm going to put this knit cap on. and you've been seeing me for a year. If I put this knit cap on, who am I? I'm still Johnny Cochran with a knit cap. And if you look at OJ Simpson over there, and he has a rather large head, OJ Simpson in a knit cap from 2 blocks away is still OJ Simpson.
Now, fascinating, there was actually a witness who sees OJ Simpson leaving the scene. He pulls out, almost hits her. She gets a clear look at him and then drives on. The prosecution never calls her because she later is contacted by media and she sells her story, and they thought that maybe that dirtied her up to some degree. But they actually had a witness that sees OJ Simpson leaving the scene, never called her.
It's no disguise. It's no disguise. It makes no sense. It doesn't fit. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. Good time, Your Honor.
All right, Mrs. Robertson.
So again, interesting, a 4-hour deliberation. There were some of the defense team that actually left town. They caught a flight. They were like, well, we're not going to be back here for a week. 4 hours to get to this verdict.
All right, Mr. Simpson, would you please stand and face the jury? Mrs. Robertson.
Superior Court of California, County of Los Angeles, in the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA097211. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder.
So there's 2 counts of murder, one for Nicole, one for Mr. Goldman. Johnny Cochran knows that if the first one comes down not guilty, for sure the next one is going to come down that way. Similarly, in the cases that we handled, civil cases, usually the first item in damages that the jury gets to, you got an idea of where your case is going to go. So you saw the very poignant reaction from Johnny Cochran, because he knows as soon as one is not guilty, he's going to be good on the other.
In violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Nicole Brown Simpson, a human being, as charged in count 1 of the information. Superior Court of the State of California, County of Los Angeles, in the matter of the people of the State of California versus Orenthal James Simpson. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Ronald Lyle Goldman, a human being, as charged in count 2 of the information.
Now, he very obviously did it. You'd have to be buried in a hole for the last 25 years not to understand that OJ Simpson killed those 2. But the questions are, how could the jury get it so wrong? And did they get it wrong? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but the prosecution still has to prove their case. And so again, while the evidence seems to be so crystal clear in a case like this, the prosecution still has to meet their burden to prove their case. And in a criminal case, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. What the defense attorneys did very skillfully was to cast doubt on just about every piece of evidence that the prosecution brought forward. And in doing so, when they got to the end of this, they said, remember, this is wrong with that evidence. Remember, this is wrong with that evidence. Remember, this is wrong with that evidence. And so when you listen to the jurors talk about their deliberation, it wasn't so much that OJ Simpson didn't do it. It was certainly the prosecution didn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So right or wrong, our system is designed to have lots of protections for folks. And one of those is that the defendant has the protection to make the government prosecute their case and prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. In the civil side, the threshold of evidence is a preponderance of the evidence, so more likely than not. But nevertheless, it's still the plaintiff's job to prove their case. A defendant in a criminal case, a defendant in a civil case, they don't have to come into court and do anything. They can just sit there and then get up at the very end and say, hey, they didn't prove it to beyond a reasonable doubt. They didn't prove it to a preponderance of the evidence. But very interesting, and to round this out, the prosecution failed to prove their case. I don't think the jury found OJ Simpson not guilty because he didn't do it. They found him not guilty because the prosecution failed to prove their case.